Welcome to the School of Rock Bottom with Oliver Mason. I'm an actor, a voiceover artist, and a mental health coach, and it's these careers and passions combined that have given birth to this podcast. And as you know, on this show, I invite fellow creatives and incredibly inspiring people who have lived through a rock bottom and survived. This is a podcast of hope and how to get out. And I'm really, really excited today because I have got the marvellous Michael Emmett in the studio. How you doing, Michael?
I'm okay, Oliver. How are you, mate?
I'm really well. Thank you so much for coming down today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
I should just say right off the top that the women's football team are currently in the World Cup as of this moment recording. And I think it's the semi-final. It's going on in the background. So if you hear any screaming and shouting, I apologise. And if you can't hear it, then I must be a brilliant audio editor. So that's really good. But, you know, if it is distracting, I just want you to imagine that Michael's got a load of fans outside trying to break in to the podcast. So that could be pretty cool.
Bless you.
So we're going to be going on a real journey over the next hour, a journey of recovery from crime, prison, drugs, the love of money, and sex addiction. It's a shocking, jaw-dropping, and hugely inspiring life. Michael's dad, Brian, was connected to the Krays, Freddie Foreman, Frankie Frasier, the Richardson gang, and the great train robbers. And I'm really, really pleased that Michael's done this for me because he's provided me with a little sort of summary, which I wouldn't be able to do because, you know, his life story is just immense. He describes himself as an ex-drug trafficker, a recovering addict, a reformed naughty boy, forever London lad, and author of Sins of Fathers, a HarperCollins bestseller. I started reading it about 3 days ago, and I literally couldn't put it down. I'll be putting a link in the show notes on how you can get yourself a copy of that brilliant book. And Michael is working to get his book of Finding Redemption into every prison in the country, and already has 5,000 books in, and I'm sure that's probably increased since that was written. Michael Emmett found his name in the headlines when he was nicked for a 13 million drug bust in 1993. It was one of the UK's biggest at the time. While in prison, with his father in the same cell, he happened to find God, hope, and with those, a new lease of life. A transformed and loving family man, Michael is sowing seeds of hope and charity around the world through speaking at events, and he hopes sharing his story of desperation and darkness will encourage others to step into the light. And he's had a couple of brilliant reviews, well, loads. I'm just going to pick two. Ray Winston says, a cracking read, really gets to the bottom of the madness of a man fighting his demons. And Davina McCall says, I thought, I'm going to go to the loo and read the first chapter, and I was on the loo for 35 minutes. I couldn't put it down. Wow.
Yeah.
So a really, bit of a horrible attempt at giving you an intro, really, because, you're going to find out now as we go on this journey what a life Michael is having. It's really inspiring and incredible. I'm going to start with my first question, which is arguably the hardest. And I'd imagine for you to pick one rock bottom moment to start us off with will be quite a challenge. But if you had to pick one moment that got you closest to your rock bottom, I wondered if you could just take us there and we'll kind of pan out from that point, please.
I suppose rock bottoms have been a part of my life for years. There's that sort of I struggled with equilibrium. It was always an up and down. And rock bottoms have been in prison cells, but the worst rock bottom I had was when my brother died. So my younger brother was 21 years he was 21, I was 26. And I was wanted by the police in Spain, and he come to visit me because my grandfather was dying just around the corner in Stockwell, and he wanted to be with me because my grandfather, on my mother's side, was a real influence on my life. He was a very normal person. He was a flower seller. He was bright, and there was no sides to him. There was no ego about him. He was just an old sort of war child who worked hard. And he was very close to me. It was a sort of, it was free love with him. There was no condition with him. He was a miserable git, but he was a wonderful man. And my mother absolutely adored him. And my brother come to visit me. I was wanted in Spain. This was in 1983, 84. And the police were looking for me in the UK. Well, they wasn't looking for me, but I was wanted by them. And my brother came to be with me, so my grandfather was passing away as we was very close. We started using cocaine that night. He wasn't really a big user, my brother. He used to enjoy bits and pieces, a glass of champagne. He liked a little gamble. And mainly used to smoke a bit of puff, but he was never out there with the high-end users like I was. And sadly, we had an argument. And we was arguing about my father. My father sadly had left my mother and met another lady and was having a child. And it really freaked him out. He was a very sensitive child. And we was arguing about, we were sort of agreeing. It was quite bizarre. But there was a few drinks, there was a few lines of coke, and we had words. And it was very hard to have words with this young man. He was totally opposite to me. He was a very, very... he was an endearing man. He was full of peace. You wanted to be around him. He sort of, what came out of him was love. There was no madness with him. He had a great sense of humour, and he was just a cool guy. He was very bright. So we had an argument, and he sort of walked off. It was in Marbella in 1984, and I went and found him. I said, "Look, come on, whatever I said." It was early hours of the morning. I gave him the car. And sadly, he drove to Malaga Airport, couldn't get on the flight. And on the way back, very tragically, went underneath a lorry and it killed him stone dead. And his girlfriend was 3 months pregnant. He never met his son, who's a wonderful man. His son, he's a carbon copy of him. And so that was a rock bottom that I think really played. I'm not sure if I understand, when we think of rock bottom, we think we're at the bottom. But I think sometimes these rock bottoms can be high energized as well. You know, they can really freak you out, and you want to change the way you feel, so you start using women, money, or drugs, or crime, or whatever you do. But this was a sort of a nail in the coffin, and it hurt badly, and it took me a long time to recover. And you know, I was really sort of freaked out that he died, and I felt responsible. And it was like as if I'd taken the angel out of the family, and everyone was we was both loved by everybody, but he had a way about him that he was. It was easy to be with him. I had the insanity of the addiction, and so that was probably my worst period of my life. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michael. I really appreciate that. And, you know, looking at your story and how you grew up, this kind of sense of this sort of light versus darkness was a kind of a theme that I felt was running through the pages for me anyway. Yeah, it's true. Going through it. And I wonder if we could just talk about some real key people in your childhood growing up, because I think it does sort of frame your story. Yeah, very much so. You know, I don't want to simplify light versus dark or kind of say one is one and one is other. It's not my place. But you describe your grandmother, Alice, you know, with these rollers in her hair. You describe her as beautiful, lovely and kind, with an amazing food room or a pantry. And then you've got your grandfather, Charlie, who you acknowledge, you know, instilled hard work and you know, education was important. But I'm going to quote something from the book here. You in reference to your grandfather, you say mental illness on a hand-me-down train, fear, dysfunctional dishonesty, violent. And you also mentioned that when he was drinking, he had a party trick where he would chew glass. So before we even sort of get to your mother and father, it seems your grandparents seemed quite, you know, polar opposite in a way.
I mean, there was a slight mistake you made in that Charlie was the sinister man, and the other man who I was talking about previously was my other grandfather on my mother's side. Right. But Charlie was my dad's dad. Yeah. And by all accounts, he was injured in the war, and he had a sleeping sickness. He was, and he sort of was comatose. He woke up. He was a cripple. He walked on two sticks, actually. And that was his nickname, Sticks. But he was very bright. First Irish descent from County Cork. The family were from Ireland, and he came to England. I think he had 5 brothers, but he suffered really badly, and he had that real anger, that violence, that you know, it was especially being crippled. It sort of made it worse, I think. And he was a very violent, angry man. He killed himself by drinking acetone. Now, Alice, who was the wife of Charlie, she did all have those lovely attributes. There was an opposite. There was a mixture and opposite. Where my mother's grandparents, my grandmother was Catholic, staunch, bless her heart. Everything was. She had so many pictures on her wall of Jesus. I thought he was a relative, but that was the difference in. But this part of the family, that's the Emmett family. That's my dad's family. They was very dysfunctional, and that wasn't out of choice. When I've done a lot of stuff, and one of the things is about, we shouldn't judge because we don't know what dwells within the darkness of the soul, and Charlie was very dysfunctional, and like I say, he killed himself, and they found him. He drank acetone, so they found him with. I read it in the newspaper. And
that's what they used to clean metal, isn't it?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, like a real, like they clean sort of silver and brass and all things like that with it. He was a very clever man. And I've met a couple of his friends on the journey who said he was the most amazing man, but he was so aggressive. And like I say, he used to eat glass. He was a rag and bone man in Battersea. And I think he sort of felt as if he was so bright and clever. I think he felt that he'd drawn the short straw, and he ruled his house with not, I wouldn't say violence, but with fear. And my grandmother Alice she was a nurse, and she had this sort of wonderful way about her. So my dad was brought up in that environment, and that was quite noisy and dangerous. Not dangerous physically, but emotionally, yeah, definitely.
And I got a sense as well, sort of growing up with your own parents, that there seemed to be, this kind of light darkness thing. And again, you can correct me if you're wrong. Just pulling out bits of your book, you describe your dad as an amateur boxer, but, really good fighter, intelligent, worked hard. And then you said he sort of inherited the darkness, the sex addiction, and got into crimes and stealing safes. And I think your dad got arrested for armed robbery and was put in a category A prison. But then you describe your mum quite differently. Traditional Southeast London family, salt of the earth, deeply respectful father. Mum gave to charity, a staunch Catholic, and a pillar. And obviously your dad's got lots of amazing qualities, and you talk about that in the book. But again, this sense of sort of a light and a darkness as a child.
I think it's like a mixture of an opposite. So where the light shone brightly with Alice and my grandmother Mary, and my grandfather John, he shone the light. But Charlie was the he was the darkness, and it was really dark. It was really dark, and a lot went on. And I suppose not a lot has been said. I mean, some things have been said, but I think we sort of, for me, I have a strong faith. And hence the name of the book is called Sins of Fathers. And I really do believe, I don't believe, I know there's a difference, because the behaviour that Charlie, my dad inherited that, and I talk about the tail of the scorpion, I think it is.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So it's like it was impregnated in my dad, and it was impregnated in me, because I started to do things emotionally, not physically, how my dad thought, how he behaved. Very sort of controlling, manipulative around women, quite rageful. And I wasn't taught those things. It was like as if they was given to me. It was part of my inheritance from my father. And in the Bible, it says, the sins of the forefathers. And I'm not religious. And I think what manifested from that was I'll tell you, here's a good example. And this is not to decry my dad's family. But my mother's family, they're flower sellers in Bond Street, and they used to live around here. They worked in the Borough Market, and they were costermongers. And there was the old-fashioned, like, piano in the house after the war. It was all fun. It was all great. The food was fantastic. Sort of old steak and kidney pies and puddings and great desserts, spotted dick, all that sort of custard. It was lovely. It really was. And it was fun, and it was, there was a schizophrenic, my dear Uncle Johnny. He had it badly. He was in a mental home for 50 years of his life. So there was that in there, but that's passed as a medical thing. But a spiritual thing is different. So the malady of the spirit in my father's generational line. When I look at the family of his sisters, of the children, most of them have suffered. There's been 6 tragic deaths, but I mean tragic deaths, real naughty deaths. I mean, my dad and 2 of his sisters lost 2 of their sons before they died. My dad lost 2 of his sons and 2 of his sisters. Now, that's a bit odd, it's a bit, and I don't want to get too over spiritual and things like that, but it's like a curse.
Right.
So there was the darkness. There was suicide in the family, 2 suicides. There was incest. There was abuse. 2 suicides, both very tragic as well. One was my grandfather and one was my cousin out in America. He hung himself, only a kid. And so you think, whoa, but you're not aware of that because it's starting to, I think as human beings, we learn a lot. I was telling you earlier about my young grandson who goes to a Spanish school. And after 2 or 3, speaking fluent Spanish, he's a baby. Yeah. So we pick stuff up.
Absolutely.
And we're made up of stuff, but we also pick stuff up. And I just think when I look at my dad's, and this is not really, I really mean this. This is not to embarrass them. This is not to say anything bad about them. And there's been a lot of kids from that side of the family suffered badly. My mum's side of the family hasn't been perfect. But you can see that the forefathers of the flour seller and all that has come out in my generation, in my sister, my cousins on that side. They all seem to be sort of jolly and their life seemed to be okay. Now, it doesn't mean to say they're better people. It's just how the cards fell.
Yeah.
So there's the light and dark that I sort of fluctuated in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's obviously really shaped sort of particularly how the first part of your life, I guess,
big
time. And there's often a big debate, isn't there, about environment and genetics. And it sounds like you got a double whammy because you're describing it being passed down quite literally.
Yeah.
And plus the environment, you were getting messages around, certain behaviours being okay. I think, you referenced Johnny. I think there was a bit in your book where you said, Johnny sort of normalised stealing, for example.
Yeah, for sure. Uncle John.
Before we sort of jump to that point, again, reading the book, there's you're incredibly likeable character in the book. I immediately felt connected to you.
Thank you.
And I think it's because straight away as a boy, I'm sort of really on your side and really sort of seeing through your eyes. And again, those themes sort of come through. You talk about, for example, your dog Trixie very affectionately. Wow. There's also a reference, I think, one time when your dad, you think he's the Chelsea manager.
You read it, you listened.
Yeah, I know. I really read it well.
I sort of forgot that.
Yeah, and when you found out he was pretending to be the Chelsea manager, you cried.
Really upset me.
And, you had this incident when you were 6, which obviously had a big impact. And, it's obviously going to be difficult to talk about, but it is in the book around the babysitter and the sexual abuse. And I just wondered if we could touch on that briefly, because I do think it frames the conversation later, maybe. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. I suppose so. There was, I don't want to go into too much details about what happened, but there was, I was exposed to sexual environment at a very, very young age. It never went on it happened 3 times, but I was 5 and 6. So I think once you start opening up these channels, talking about young kids and my grandson learning Spanish, if you're opening up other areas of their lives, spiritually it gets in. Without a shadow of, and I bear witness, I don't blame the babysitter, because I don't know what was going on for her. That's why I try not to judge people.
Yeah.
Wow. And it doesn't give it the excuse, but there's always something behind it. And I think when we do it intentionally, then we have to check ourselves. But when there's unintentional stuff going on, so I formulated a very dishonest value for women. And it wasn't fair to other women because I never become the abuser as such. I wasn't into, touching young children. But I think my boundaries, I don't know if the word is boundaries is right, but I think my sort of take on women was my mother was boundaried in love. And I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. It was a very personal relationship I had with my mother. And then the abuser, that was, it's a terrible thing to say, but the last time it happened, I can remember finding it a bit exciting. I don't mean to be weird when I say that. I was 9. It happened 3 times from 6 to I was 9.
Yeah.
And I can remember finding it, it's a terrible thing to say, but it's true. And so that was the foundation of what I believe women were.
Yeah.
You know, and so completely different 2 sides of the fence, but it sort of affected my life.
Yeah.
Because I always had, sadly, I it's not as if I'm being a womanizer and I'm showing off about the conquest. It's not about that. It's quite sad, actually. It's really, really sad.
Well, sorry to interject. I think you described it quite well in the book when this is a direct quote when you talk about losing your virginity, and I think at the age of 12, and you said you got the high of sex, that you said the high of sex worked, but it attached itself to the sexual abuse.
Very much so it did. And it continued throughout my life.
Yeah.
There was a certain thing that happened that I used to repeat, not to no one else, on myself. And I don't want to go too deep into that, but so it definitely had an influence without a shadow of doubt.
Yeah.
But forget what it's doing to my private parts. What's it doing to my dear little head and my spirit and my heart?
Yeah.
And about the knowledge of life.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know about the knowledge of life was taken. I was robbed of it. No one's fault. There's no judgment here. And so being robbed of that growth, you know, if you're 5 and you go to 6 in a normal environment, it's great. Then you go to 7 and you go to 8. But I was cut off at the age of 6 and things went strange. And I remember being very rageful. I remember being very quiet. I'm not a quiet person. And I was always close to my mother's legs. I was always trying to get my mother's hand. I was always, you know, and I think she witnessed that. And so as I grew, I would always be having a dishonest relationship with a woman. So I'd always have to, I'd been married twice. So I always had the mother's love.
Yeah.
And I always had the dysfunction of the dishonest sex because I wasn't acting out like I said. But when I had my affair, I don't want to call women affairs because that's not kind. When I got attached to women I shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
And they got attached to me, it was always the same as the abuse, that it was very secret, it was close to home, and it was always sneaky. Right?
Yeah.
So I repeated that and still can if I'm not careful. I mean, I haven't done it for a number of years, but so where did that mindset come to do that? As much as I hated it as well. I mean, I hated myself, and yet I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And the places it took me to. I mean, one of my dearest friends, I slept with his wife, and he was my dear friend.
Yeah.
And I sit here, and it doesn't make it, because he got sexually abused, he's all right to do that. I'm not saying that.
No.
All I'm trying to say, maybe, is we have to be really, really careful if we take the responsibility on of having children and grandchildren that we realise that they need to be loved, they need to be guided, at least till they're 18 years of age. And then you go, look, I've taught you what I believe I've taught you, not sex abuse, violence, you know. And I think that's why we have a society that's broken. You know, there's a fatherless society, I believe. And I see it. I work in the prisons and all that. You know, it's pretty dark out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really dark.
And we'll definitely come on to that.
Whatever, yeah.
And all your brilliant work that you do around prisons we'll definitely talk about.
You speak very highly of me. I thought there was someone behind me when you was chatting.
No, well, I do. I think incredibly highly
you.
of you. I think your story is incredible. I everyone go and read Michael's book. I think it's
thank you
amazing.
very much.
You talk about sex addiction a couple of times in the book. I just thought, for anyone who doesn't understand what sex addiction is it the same as drug addiction or alcohol addiction in the sense that you're using the behavior to self-soothe or run away from self? Is it similar to kind of alcohol and drugs? For someone who doesn't understand sex addiction, how would you describe it?
Well, it's not about having sex.
Right.
It's not about having sex.
Yeah.
It's the same as the wanting and the getting. If I'm going to buy a bit of cocaine back in the day, the arranging it And meeting someone and getting it was the high.
Yeah. Sure.
As soon as it was up my trumpet, then it was like, oh dear, whatever. I'm not saying I never enjoyed it, because I did at times, but I wouldn't suggest that to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so with women, it's like the dishonesty of the sex addiction. Sex addiction only portrays itself when it's being dishonest, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. In many ways, I don't want to decry anybody, but sort of, women who do that sort of thing for a job, and bless them, I hope they're all right. I don't mean to be disrespectful to that trade.
Yeah.
But, men seem to go there to satisfy, which they think is a desire of lust. Mm. And there's a counterfeit here, because lust and love are the same. I know they're not the same, but the thing of having sex is, if done in a loving environment, it's beautiful. Yeah. Done in a dishonest way is very addictive. Mm. It's like, wow, I'm going to be cool. But the sex addiction doesn't mean to say, and I don't mean to be rude or disrespectful to many men or any women, it's not, oh yeah, I had sex for 12 hours. It's like, I was on the coke for 12 hours. It's not like that. Yeah. It's about the desire to fix the broken person. Yeah. That gaping wound, that sort of, what opens up to so much dysfunction. I mean, I feel so sad when I see how much, let's call it the devil or the darkness. Yeah. What it's portraying and what it's making people do. And I don't think people understand how serious this stuff is. Mm. Addiction, I don't care what you say, is a mental health issue.
No, absolutely.
Attached to a spiritual malady. Mm. So when we start to heal, but yeah, sex addiction, I would say, is about the wanting and the getting. And it's also about wanting to be, do they like me? Mm. Am I fanciable? Right. Or maybe taking someone else's stuff that they've got, like my friend's wife. Mm. I had no right. It wasn't mine. It had nothing to do with me. Mm. I had no right to do that. And we was all very close. And that was the wanting and the getting and the desire that was, it never fixed me whatsoever, caused nothing but heartache.
Yeah. Thanks ever so much for sharing that, Michael. I think it's going to be really helpful for people to understand sex addiction more. I might have got this wrong, but I almost felt like your first addiction was stealing. and the only reason I say that is the way that you described it in the book. You said that you got a buzz. I think you were 10 when you started getting into stealing. It gave you a buzz, and you noticed that you were scared and excited. Yeah. And we know, and you just described it there, in science, that if you've got dopamine and adrenaline, the fear chemical, and you mix it together, it actually creates a bigger high. Yeah. That thing of being scared and excited, or reward and adrenaline. And it seems to me that, would you call your stealing an addiction?
Yeah. Early days I did.
Yeah.
So I learned, no one taught me to steal. My father was a criminal. He didn't teach me to steal. In fact, he took me away from it. But I used to live in a place called New Malden. And then I moved to Epsom. And New Malden in 1964, it was like, it was sort of suburbia. It was a local police station, was a little house. There was one fish shop, one wimpy bar. There was a train station that you had to, there was nothing sort of robust about it. And it was very sort of after the war, sort of retired people, burning leaves in their garden. And we turned up, my dad and us, we were like the Clampett family. And we turned up, we were out of the flats. And so I started to steal from Woolworths. And I used to get, my mother used to have this sort of cape. Mm. So I used to nick her cape, go into Woolworths in New Malden High Street, and steal like cosmetics. I used to put the thing over, and I'd get so frightened, but I loved it. Mm. And I'd come out, and there was a shoe shop called Bater's or Barter's in New Malden High Street, and all the girls it was in the summer holidays, and all the girls used to hang about there. And I can remember going over to the girls. Quite bizarre that I stole stuff for women, actually. Mascara, lipstick. Right. And then I'd take it home to my mother. I was always wanting to give my mother gifts. Yeah. She'd go, what you been doing, And then I got arrested at a very young age. I never got charged for stealing fruit out of the fruit shop. I broke into the fruit shop when I was 11. Right. And I just, my dad was shocked. He was extremely shocked, my father. We wasn't taught that. There was something in the background that we knew was dishonest.
Yeah.
But we wasn't taught how to go and steal. It was in me.
It was in you.
It was part of the scorpion's tail.
Part of this, yeah, absolutely. How much do you think? I mean, you know, there's a few little stories here. I mean, for example, you know, I think you charged someone at school 20p for you to
David Way
to watch you kiss your girlfriend, which might show a bit of early entrepreneurial skills going on there. And then I think you started drinking. You know, but also you do talk about in the book during this time that you actually started praying as well quite regularly.
At a young age, yeah.
Yeah, so there was, again, this kind of light and darkness theme going through. And then we get to your teenage years, and you talk about crime, fighting, sex, drugs, and football to numb feelings. And then I think all of that seemed to escalate and then come to a head in 1993, which is obviously the sort of the moment where you get sentenced.
Yeah.
And for anyone that missed it at the beginning, it was a 12.5-year sentence, and you were caught with 13 million's worth of cannabis, a 5-ton haul, I believe.
Yeah.
How did that come about? I mean, I don't expect you to go into any of the details of the case, but what was that like, being sentenced for that long? And I know you didn't serve that, you know, the full sentence, but I'm almost surprised you didn't mention that in the rock bottom, because that sounds like a really scary moment when you were sentenced for that amount of time.
In fact, I was relieved.
Yeah.
When I was arrested. So how it come about, my father was involved with, you know, so-called London gangster. I don't like the word gangster. I don't know what it means really. With London sort of criminals, let's call it the criminal underworld in London. And I think there was bank robberies going on, and there was big sentences, and drugs became sort of the new thing in the early 80s. And my dad had a friend who was attached to, I know this sounds a bit crazy, but it's not. They was attached to the American Five Families in New York, the mafia. This is true.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I'm not sure that made it happen, but I think something come out of that. The stuff started coming into the UK from Europe in the early 80s.
Yeah.
And then it progressed. I got involved. He could see that I was a sort of big, strong lad, and I was up for it. Yeah. And I think eventually, reluctantly, he agreed to bring me in. And I went to work with him, my father. And so he had contacts everywhere. This was international. It was out in America, Europe, Croatia, Italy, and it was massive. And it was a lot more than what I got arrested for. And it come in the papers, otherwise I wouldn't be telling you this, but we was part of a massive mothership's consignment that went round Europe in 1993.
Yeah.
They will say there was a previous attempt where there was an aborted load that they said we aborted a huge amount in the Bristol Channel a year previous. So when we got arrested, it came out of that, and it became out of my dad's sort of fraternity of friends, the criminal fraternity that he hung with. Yeah. And it was a worldwide operation. It was massive, actually. I wasn't massive. I was part of it. And my job was to get it into this country. Yeah. Or help get it into this Trump. Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. With the influence of my father and his friends. And I got arrested at gunpoint in 1993, November the 7th. And if you want to know the truth, it was a relief. Yeah. And the first things, and prior to me getting arrested, prior to me getting handcuffed, I was quite volatile, and I wasn't having it. And they knew that. And I think that, I mean, I've no one to be frightened of, but they had this sting about me, this sort of thing in their head that I was something, that I was this big sort of criminal gangster, and I weren't. I was a broken child who had addictions, who really didn't give a shit. That's what it was like for me. So when they came for me in Bideford in North Devon, the way they come at me, I thought, what's all this about? They were seriously gunning for me, whether it was the connection of my father, whether it was the people that I was meeting prior to the arrest, because they was quite saucy people, but they sort of had it in for me. So I was very reluctant to listen to them. I was very, I come screaming. But once I'd been sat down and I had this gun pointed at me, I was like his trophy. And he went, I've got you. I've been trying to get you for 18 months. And he said, a penny for your faults. And this is no shame to me, but I had a tear in my eye over my 3 children. I thought, what have I done to my kids? What a bizarre way to think. You know, I should be thinking I'm banging trouble. But it was a relief. And I remember sitting there handcuffed, looking up at the sky, thinking, do you know what? Thank God this is over. And it changed my life.
Wow.
It really changed my life going to prison.
Yeah. It was really interesting reading your account being in prison. And, you know, I couldn't believe that you actually shared a cell with your dad for a couple of
2
years.
years.
I couldn't believe that when I was, you know, reading the book. I was like, wow, I just can't even imagine being in that scenario. And obviously, I just want to pick out a couple of pivotal moments. For me, at least, anyway. I think you smoked some skunk in prison and had a panic attack. And it sounds like it was your first ever panic attack, the way it was described, maybe.
And it wasn't my first, but it was wall to wall, and it frightened the life out of me.
Yeah.
So I think what had taken place, my dad had never used cannabis before in his life.
Yeah.
Although it was to him, it was a commodity. It was money.
Yeah.
Could have been potatoes. So he wasn't a puffer. But we used to get stoned in the cell. I got him on the weed and started painting and getting up the windows and singing Irish rebel songs. And, you know, he was a funny guy. He was only a small little guy, but a rocket. And I remember I had a wife and an ex-wife this time. Yeah. And I was caught in the middle of both of them. Guilt, shame, confused, felt lousy out, you know. Yeah. What are you doing to these people? Beautiful people as well. And I remember going back in and I'd had an argument with my ex-wife and my wife about money before I went into the cell. It was quite intense. Dad was sitting there. He had his little one, Skinner, doing his art. And I just wanted to get off my face.
Yeah, yeah.
And I rolled these 2 or 3 joints and they freaked me out and I was gone. And I felt like I was losing my head. And I got really frightened. Yeah, yeah. And I remember jumping up in the cell and looking out the cell window. And over the wall was a pub. And there was 2 people, I couldn't see them, but I could hear them singing this song. And just for a moment, it checked my reality. And it brought me back round. But I woke up in the morning and I really suffered. Yeah. It stopped me smoking cannabis. Wow. So there was a bonus to it. But it frightened me. Yeah. It frightened me. I'm not sure if that was a rock bottom or a reality of my truth. Yeah, absolutely. I had to do something about what was going on for me. Yeah, absolutely. You know? And it's, you know, you picked up a Bible, I think, in that moment or the next day, and you stumbled across a scripture. I think it's Matthew 17:20, which roughly translates to, for if you have faith even as small as a tiny mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move, and it would go far away. Nothing would be impossible. And it seemed like that scripture really impacted you. And well, you've done your own work.
Yeah, well done. Finally.
Well done. So, yeah, that's... So when I read the Bible, I hid it behind my pillow because my faith related to my wonderful Catholic mother, who, like I say, had pictures and water from Lourdes. It was very like a ritual, religious ritual. And I wasn't really I'm not religious today. But as I was reading that, I panicked. I was in a state of despair and thought, I'm doing 12 and a half years, plus a fine, which may be a little bit longer. I'm not going to get through this. Yeah. I really am not going to get through this. And prior to that, it was a very poignant moment. There was a lifer, he'd done 22 years, and 20 years he'd done in sobriety, in recovery, away from alcohol. Yeah. And I had never really spoke to him, but he walked up to me. I was at my cell door, and he went, listen, mate, he said, there's only one person who you've got to get on with in this prison. Yeah, straight away the ego. Well, who's that then, mate? He said, he's yourself. And I thought, what made him say that? So I claimed him. I said, why did you say that? He said, I'm 20 years sober. Wow. He said, I can see what you're going through. He said, it's you have to get on with. And that really echoed. It echoed in my spirit, in my mind. And I thought, don't get on with me. I had no chance of communicating with the insanity. It was too powerful. It was too screwed up. It had everything in there, money, drugs, abuse. It was crazy. So when that happened to me with a panic attack the following day, the reality of, well, I'm straight, I'm not stoned.
Yeah.
And reality weren't prison, and I was doing 12 and a half years. That weren't my reality. That wasn't important. What was important was the inner turmoil.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I don't know if you've ever had like a train running through your brain.
Yeah.
Where you can't think. And when I read that scripture in the Bible, it was only for a nanosecond, but the brain went quiet. And I thought, what's that? And I responded to it. And I tried to read it again. Hold on, this is my way out. It wasn't about God. It was about, hold on, there's a word in here and I've got peace. Well, it was about God, but it wasn't about let's become a Christian and let's be religious.
Yeah.
I was searching for this, and no one knew I was desperate. I was a man of many masks, and no one knew I was desperate. And that was my quest, and I started to research.
Wow.
I was in trouble, mentally in trouble.
And there's many accounts of you experiencing the power of, you call it the power of the Holy Spirit in prison. What was it that had such a profound impact on your psyche? Particularly if someone's sort of an atheist listening to this, who maybe doesn't understand how something like Holy Spirit is a concept. What was it about what you felt in that moment that was so healing?
Okay, yeah. So that's a great question. So I think what happened was this. I'm not name dropping, but I used to know her, Samantha Fox, and she'd become a Christian at HC Holy Trinity Brompton in Knightsbridge, the home of the Alpha course. It's a course that people introduction to Christianity. And I was not looking to be a born again Christian. I can assure you of that. What the world sees it as, even what the church sees it as, what non-believers see it as. I was in that frame of mind. I'll leave off, born again Christian, church, guitar and sandals, and it was, and that's my concept. And I can imagine a lot of people looking at it the same way.
Right.
But what happened to me, I was in an environment, Samantha Fox introduced me to Holy Trinity Brompton. We'd done a charity event, they came down. And I don't want to get too steeped into things like revival and things like that, but there was a revival in a church in Canada. But we'll leave that to one side. And a lot of coincidences started to take place.
Right.
Yeah. And someone had a dream, I had a dream very similar to this guy, and I thought it's strange. But I was always a lucky charmer. You know, and I always thought God was a punishing God. Right. So when I used to pray as a young kid, I was petrified of Myra Hindley, and I was constantly praying, and I used to have dreams, nightmares about her.
Right.
So I was constantly, please, I was frightened. Fear had got me like you could not believe at that age. And so I was in this environment. There was a lot of us in this chapel.
Yeah.
And something took place, and I tell you what, I won't go into it because it's hard to believe, but it's easy to believe that night turns to day and we spin round in an orbit at 1,000 miles an hour, and they think it's whatever they think it is. But to me, it's a miracle. A child being born is a miracle. Yeah, the concept of us making love to our husband or wife and having a child. I mean, when you think about it, it's absolutely incredible. And then we take the heavens for granted.
Yeah. The
moon, the sun. You know, that doesn't constitute church.
Yeah.
That constitutes love and, you know, creation. And so, and when I looked at Jesus as well, after I get to the point, an overwhelming peace came over me in that room.
Yeah.
People can get peace in loads of ways.
Yeah.
But my moment was then.
Yeah.
And then when I started to research the life of Jesus, without looking at sandals and tambourines, and I started to see what he was about. He was a tough guy. You know, whether we believe he's the Son of God or not, I do. It's about his character. He was bullied, he was beaten up, and that's a fact. There's evidence that did happen. But I don't want to get into that. But the mere fact that he was on the cross, and I suppose we really find it hard to believe, because the cross is Easter eggs.
Right.
Christmas is presents. But for me, the truth of, and I'm not against Easter egg and Christmas presents, but I find the warrior spirit in it.
Yeah.
I found, and when we talk about spirituality, and because it's the church and it's Holy Spirit, and I'm like it with it too, so don't get me wrong, But because of my experience, that I found an overwhelming peace. And then I started to believe Jesus weren't an informer, he weren't a grass. He said, they know not what they do. Yeah. And I just find that part of it so incredible. And when we talk about the spirit, I felt that day. I felt, and I'm not saying I'm the only one who feels it that way.
Yeah.
Each to their own, investigate. And I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm just saying that it worked for me and it's changed me. And recovery has as well.
Yeah.
And recovery is higher power, what everyone wants to do. But the mere fact that what engulfed me was some sort of love and peace.
Right.
That wasn't infused by a drug or a sex or money. It was a natural feeling of peace. And I thought, my God, this is real.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the moment.
Yeah.
And no one, it wasn't mind altering. It wasn't, oh yeah, you was in a church in prison, you was in lots of trouble, which people have said. And I understand that. No. This was internal.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's true for me.
A lot of people say, don't they, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And finding a way to connect, and it sounds like it gave it to you in spades.
Yeah.
That channel,
Yeah.
And I suppose everyone's got their own version of what that means.
Absolutely.
But
I've tried to walk away, and I can't.
Yeah.
And I don't want to no more.
Well, I think when you left prison, you talk about a relapse. I think a couple of days later on coke, and that was when I realised in the book that you were definitely on your recovery journey already, because you used the word relapse, and it seemed like it was a bit of a long road for you. You talk about going to Hong Kong and Kenya and Canada and Uganda, Korea, doing, going out there to try and help people and spread the message. But you said it didn't heal your spirit, and it took a long time for you, didn't it, for you to find that peace? I think.
Yeah, it did.
It was a bit of a journey.
Yeah. Wow.
The theme of forgiveness comes through strongly for me when I read the book. Did you have to forgive yourself first?
I struggle with that.
Right.
I still struggle with that.
Okay.
I've got better.
Yeah.
But I think, if we look at, let's look at hatred.
Yeah.
I don't think we choose to hate.
Yeah.
I think if we really was true to ourselves, we choose to love.
Yeah.
But it doesn't come naturally. For me, it never. Love came with the add-on of lust and sex, and I didn't know heart language. My head wasn't connected to my heart or my spirit. So I suppose what I wanted to be, I couldn't achieve.
Right.
So the superficial high of a drug sort of tapped into, oh yeah, man, like I'm peaceful, I'm loving, and and I fucking swear still. So
right.
You know what I mean? I'm not sort of this holier than now. But it was for me. I don't know. I suppose the peace and wanting to be something that I couldn't be.
Yeah,
I found in this, and so when I'd done all this work with the church, all right, that's going to get me better. I spoke, and I spoke in front of. And this is not me blowing my own trumpet, but I spoke in a number of thousands of people.
Yeah,
and something seems to happen when I do it.
Yeah.
And I think, oh my God, and it comes from within.
Yeah.
And I think where the dirty soul got touched by some sort of power of love, that comes out. Excuse me. But I struggled with who I was. And I think pride played a big part, ego. And also when I was doing this stuff with the church, because it was sort of out there, it was being sort of liked. It was making, you was really good, mate. And it was affirmation. And it was something, but I'd go back into my room and I'd think, what is going on? I can't connect. I can't. All I want to do is have sex or whatever, or go and earn loads of money or whatever I wanted to do. Because the dirty soul was more powerful than the love and the peace that I'd received, because I allowed it to be.
Right.
I chose it. It was a thing I chose. I didn't mean to. Subconsciously, I chose the darkness. So that was the fight.
I think there's an old parable about that, isn't there? I think it might come from.
I hope that made sense.
Oh, it makes complete sense. I can't remember what country it comes from, but anyway, there's I think the story goes there's two wolves, or two large animals, and one's called fear and one's called love, something like that.
Right.
And a child asks, which one wins when it has a fight, and he says the one that you feed.
Amen. Well, absolutely.
That is that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not only are you a reformed character yourself, but you're also really passionate about reforming others, aren't you? And I think you do a lot of charity work around that.
Yeah, I do. We've got our own charity attached to the book.
Yeah.
It's called Finish Well in the UK, but we're attached to another charity in Ireland called Ashes to Gold. And our part of the charity is we go in. I mean, I was in Exeter prison this week, and after 30 years.
Oh wow!
I go down with a company that we work with called NASC, and we get people work for scaffolding.
Yeah.
And we try to home them with another charity called Oasis, but that's at its embryo stage. So we go in. We call it sponsorship in the fellowship of AA and AA, whatever that is. All right to mention that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah, okay. And so we call it mentoring. So we work with them coming out of Nick.
Yeah.
We meet them in the prison. We like to do a little bit of work with them in the prison. When they come out, we try to help them, house them, and then we get them jobs straight away. They do a workshop for a couple of days. And they get out on the tools and they become scaffolders.
Wow.
And then, but I mentor, I mean, I've got one on with me now. He's done 33 years in prison. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And then I've got another kid from the Polish jails who was a right dangerous kid.
Yeah.
He was into violence and all things like that. And they've been working with him for 3 years. Leaps and bounds. And I think all we do in this charity, we're just the blind leading the blind. We're trying to formulate a way where people can go, listen, I'm really screwed up. I've messed up. I'm frightened of what everyone's saying about me. I don't know what I'm doing. We like to go in and go, do you know what? It's all right.
Yeah.
Let's sort of try and unpack it. And we try to love them.
Yeah.
And loving, not like people pleasing. Love is a verb, is an action to do. Yeah, you give a man a big handshake, you're loving him.
Yeah.
So we try to do that. There's a number of us who are involved, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
We only keep what we got by giving it away. Absolutely. And that part of my work I absolutely love.
Oh, I think it's absolutely brilliant. And, and in the show notes, I'm going to put some links there so people can find out more about that. I think it's really, really good. I could literally chat to you like all day, but unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up shortly. But I haven't. There's a couple of questions I must get in because I'm desperate. So obviously this is called School of Rock Bottom. So it's about the hard learned lessons that you learn in the darkness that really brings you back to the light. And that's why you're like the perfect guest, really. So I wanted to pull out a couple of quotes from the book because I think it sums it up really well. And I'd like you to elaborate slightly on them. So this is one quote from your book. It says, "In the flesh, God slaughtered me, only because in the spirit it did me good."
Yeah.
That immediately rang true for me. But for someone that maybe doesn't understand that, how would you sort of phrase that?
So the flesh is the desire to lust.
Right.
The desire to, that's what we've spoken about.
Yeah.
The drugs, the money. But because I got touched by something, which I call it was the spirit.
Yeah.
That's where I found the connection that the hardened heart from the flesh keep hurting the heart.
Yeah.
Keep doing things that are wrong. We reap the best spiritual law I've ever heard is we reap what we sow.
Yeah.
So learn to sow well.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the ability, the ego, the pride, the brokenness. So that was all the flesh. When the spirit came and the spirit touched me, it was like Dynarod. Places that they can't reach when they're cleaning out the toilets. Something touched me in the dirty soul and I became alive.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easy because
No.
the defects didn't want to go. The flesh didn't want to die and I'm still struggling with it, but it ain't what it used to be.
Yeah.
And I can see the evidence by receiving the spirit of love, truth and joy. Forget the church. I'm talking about the truth of the love of God. Yeah. And I think, and I'm not trying to convert or be religious, but that's where the spirit kills the flesh.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I know it really, really does.
It's a process, but we've got to keep practicing it. We've got to be in it to win it.
Yeah.
We give so much time and energy to the darkness. If we give it to the light, it lights us back.
Yeah.
And it really does. And I'm not being weird. And I was mentally ill. Today I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm getting there. I'm still struggling, but I'm winning.
I think as well, when you are connected, and I always felt, you know, with your story that you always were connected, you know,
in a funny way.
But just, you know, going a bit left and right, that it will eventually pull you in that right direction.
Correct.
And, you know, I remember hearing a phrase many years ago that really rung true to me that, you know, the universe will keep giving you the same lesson until you learnt it. And sometimes, you know, that can be quite a brutal one. I mean, your story, it really was. It really, really was. You were bashed with it. In fact, you said God gives us enough rope to hang yourself.
Yeah.
And we learn through the pain. So, you know, you really went through it to learn, didn't you?
Yeah,
You learned the hard way.
Yeah.
And I love this quote. You said, surrender is super. Simplicity is awesome and massive. And right at the beginning of the book, you write something which might be a nice way to end this conversation. You say the mountains we climb lead us to the valleys of peace.
Yeah.
Where did that peace come from? Do you think, is it too simple for me to say that everything you've been through has kind of led you to your ultimate purpose, which is in a way to help other people and give back?
No, it's exactly true. So the mountains we climb to the valleys is a phrase that was given to me. And I think when we climb a mountain, we're exhausted. And when we see the open, beautiful valleys, there's a sense of achievement. And I think the mountain climbing is where we start to break away the stuff. Endurance, you know, self-pity goes, manhood comes. We're climbing, we're fighting. And God gives us the peace. But I'll tell you one of the things that has changed my life. Yeah, I was a lousy father. My wife was absolutely superb because I didn't understand heart language. Mine was head or whatever it was. And then God gave me 8 grandchildren. Yeah. And because I lost everything. And I used to spoil my children. Yeah. I'm talking about financially. So where I had me and not my toys, I had to communicate with these 8 beautiful new babies. I mean, they're 15 down to 1. And it opened up my heart. And I have unconditional love with them. There's no hidden agendas. There's no they want or I want. It's a connection of peace, love, joy and happiness. And it's come from my grandchildren. I believe God's used them to soften and open and heal my heart.
Wow. Slight sidestep before we finish up. When we spoke about forgiveness earlier on, you were very quick to say, I get the impression that you've forgiven a lot of people. I mean, even when we spoke about the babysitter, you were quick to say no judgment and she had her own story. Yeah. But when I said to you, have you forgiven yourself? I did notice you paused. And I just really, really hope that you have.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I tell you, when I forgive myself is when I don't repeat.
Right.
Like I have to be careful with my rage. Yeah. Okay. So if I tap into it, then I hate myself again. So they're the times when I don't forgive myself. I'm very hard on myself. But I think the ability to forgive is because I had to be forgiven.
Right.
I've had to be forgiven by lots of people.
Right.
Yeah. I was like Marmite. They love me and they hate me. Yeah. Because of my addiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had to be forgiven by lots of people. But I've had to learn to forgive. And the power of reaping and sowing. If I sow forgiveness, if I sow it into my people who've harmed me, and I let that go, yeah, they're not living in my head, how dare you? And I think it enables me to start to forgive myself because I had the ability to forgive them.
Absolutely.
So I have to work that program, but I'm a lot better at it.
Yeah.
And well done for noticing that.
And you'd probably be the first person to say that God has forgiven you anyway.
Amen.
So you just got to get an agreement with him,
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
Which I think that's something that you like to do.
Oh, bless you.
Yeah.
I've thoroughly enjoyed myself, I have.
It's been brilliant, you know. I could chat all day to Michael, all week. There's an absolute party going on in the background. I don't know if England have beaten Australia in the World Cup.
Not sure.
But if you can hear it, that there's been a right party going on. But I've just blanked it out because of this brilliant conversation.
Thank you.
And hopefully it hasn't spoilt your enjoyment of the podcast. I'll be I'll be, doing a lot of audio editing later. So hopefully you can't hear much. Michael, thanks so much for coming down.
My pleasure. Thank you. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, really great to meet you as well. It's been an absolute riot and a pleasure. And I've learned so much. And
thank you.
I can't reiterate. Go and get Michael's book. I couldn't put it down. I'd agree with Davina McCall. Could not put it down. And some of it I did on Audible as well, which you narrate very, very well. So
thank you, Oliver.
I'm going to put all of the show notes in and ways to connect with Michael on social media and how to, get his book and obviously all the charity work. It will all be there. But guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please share this with people that you think will enjoy this episode. Rate, review it, helps the algorithm, all that good stuff. And as always, I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care of yourself. Thank you.